Alright, what's going on, everybody? And indeed, we are doing another PC stream, so I'm looking forward to it. And I also don't want to spend too much time on it because we tried to set up the stream, we tried to do a reaction, we tried to do Bluetooth wireless headphones because I just like the aesthetic of it, doing reaction videos with Bluetooth headphones as opposed to a wired headset. But unfortunately, my headphones weren't connecting after many attempts. Even removing the device from my Bluetooth, devices and, reconnecting it, that still didn't work, which was annoying, but you know what? The show must go on, so let's just hop into the reaction video. And it's been a long time since I did reaction videos, but yeah, this is indeed Jimmy High Roller saying we are done with the 90s. But my question is, are we? All right, let's hop into it. And hopefully the audio sounds fine. And hopefully the, Jimmy High Roller YouTube video is not blocking out my audio. So let's see how it goes. First reaction in the PC stream. So 3, 2, 1, let's do this.
My brothers, we are in the midst of a civil war. The age-old debate of past versus present has reached critical mass, and sides have been...
Hope y'all can hear it.
A revolution is taking place, and we're losing good men. Old school versus new school. Back in the day versus modern day. A story as old as time itself. I tried to ignore this bloodbath, but just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, it all got so much worse. We done with the 90s. 80s and 90s coming to light, showing that the good old days were in fact not that good. This whole time, the punishing defense of legend was actually just a bunch of plumbers camping out in the paint looking for someone to hack. Shots clanking off the backboard, players running around aimlessly, wreaking havoc. And worst of all, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, the supposed greatest basketball player of all time, didn't even have a left hand.
Interesting. So opening thoughts on that, because obviously I feel like you're coming for the, reaction videos, my thoughts on it. Because if you just wanted to watch, Jimmy High Roller, just watch this video, right? You're getting my taste, my opinions on this. So number one, that Michael Jordan could not go left. He did not have a left hand, which we all know is cap. It's just any LeBron fan out there wants to diminish the actual GOAT. And so they're pulling at anything they can do, grasping at any straws they can to diminish Jordan because they know that LeBron will never get, sits reigns and sits tries no matter what. So they're trying to do whatever it takes to get LeBron above Jordan.
What is going on? Have we been lied to about basketball in the 80s and 90s? Are we really done with that era of hoops? Or are we being deceived by lowlights, misinformation, and cherry-picked clips? Well, I think I've got an answer, and some of y'all ain't gonna like it.
Let's go, Jimmy High Roller, I'm ready.
Today's video is sponsored by
SeatGeek,
the testimonies from past indies. Download the Clips Came Rolling experience in the completely divided fans of the NBA.
Sorry, I did not want to play the ad. We move.
Video essays, hard-hitting analysis, testimonies from past and present players talking about their experience in the league and how it's changed over the years. And none of those things managed to do what these 5 simple words have done in just a week. Soon enough, the clips came rolling in of players from that era dribbling off their feet, throwing up air balls, and putting together moves that you might see at your local high school's JV game. So, for whatever it's worth, here is my long-winded take on this whole discussion.
Let's not act like LeBron doesn't have low lights. He has had times where he's dribbling off his foot, or he completely shoots a free throw and completely hits the side of the backboard or whatever. Right? I mean, Paul George, Pandemic P, hit the side of the backboard on a corner 3. Right? So it's not like today's game is perfect. We also have our lowlights in today's game. LeBron's not immune to it.
I want to begin by saying what this discourse has taught me more than anything else is that NBA fans today never actually took the time to go back and watch games of the past. Brothers, I have been harping on this for years, begging for fans of the game, whether you are new or have been watching for years, to just go back and watch full games. Not highlights, not clips, full-length games of eras from the past. And after seeing this discussion devolve into where it is today, it is clear to me that most people never take the time. I'm seeing countless fans have this sort of awakening as they're watching films of these old games as if the footage was buried or lost, and it's finally being unearthed for the world to see. It's been right here on YouTube for the past 15 years. You mean to tell me the same fans who chime in with a full-blown thesis on the GOAT debate never spared the time to even watch the games they were referring to? I guess that does explain a lot.
I think that's just a problem. It's not just a basketball NBA, we don't the 90s take. To me, that's anything in social media realm when it comes to any reviews of anything. Could be basketball, could be, football with the NFL, could be, college sports, could be movies, TV shows, music, anything. And it's just the, side of TikTok and everything where people have to come up with their concise arguments, what they think of a certain topic or a certain, show or movie or whatever in 5-10 seconds, because TikTok attention spans are 5-10 seconds and that's all you can do, right? People don't have the time to, sit through hours and hours of actual game footage, but a 10-second clip on TikTok, oh yeah, that's all people need to, further approve or disprove their opinion. That's all people need. It's the same thing with, anything. Like, for instance, like, I'm trying to think of a really good example when it comes to, like, movies or whatever. Damn it. It's a really good example if I can't think of one. Oh, I know. I mean, it's, pretty much what's going on with, Marvel and Disney and, Star Wars right now, where people don't have the time to, sit through those, like, MCU shows or those, Star Wars Disney Plus shows or whatever. But a 5-10 second clip on TikTok is all you need to see of, how things are going down at, the old Mouse House, right? Like, for instance, no one took the time to, watch, Thor: Love and Thunder. I had the displeasure of, seeing it in the cinema and everything, right? No one saw it in the cinema, but all people needed on TikTok is see that, clip of the kid with, like, this horrible CGI green screen effect. That's all the internet need to have the opinion on what they thought of that movie.
Now, I'd like to think I'm somewhere in the middle on this whole discussion. I have said on multiple occasions that players in today's NBA are simply more skilled than players of the past, which is
agreed
in bigger stat lines and higher point totals than ever before.
100%. No, 100% agree with this. That players nowadays are just more skilled, because just think about the context of how we view an NBA player nowadays, right? Like, we're so used to seeing, triple doubles, 30, 40 points a game, players averaging 30, like Shea averaged 30, Luka averaged a 30-point triple double, Giannis routinely averages, 30 and 15, Jokic averages, a 28, triple double, right? That was not how things always been, right? Like, 20 points average in today's league is a solid NBA player, right? A second option on a contender, right? A second option. But 10 years ago, if you averaged 20, 25 points, you were in talks of getting MVP, or you either win MVP or you were a finalist for MVP, averaging 20 points a game. If you average 10 points a game, you were seen as a third option on a contender 10 years ago. Nowadays, if you average 10 points, you are seen as a bum. You are seen as a role player. Which is crazy. Crazy to me how times change. We forget that averaging 30-point triple-double is historic and unheard of, but we're just so used to seeing it from Luka every night that we don't think about it. But no, it's a 30-point triple-double. This is not normal.
It's not the defense that has gotten worse, it's the offense that has gotten better. You know, that whole spiel. But I also have an appreciation for the greats that came before and how incredible some players of past eras were. In fact, I almost feel like I'm hallucinating seeing this 90s basketball slander campaign unfold in front of my eyes. It feels like everyone's perception on the age-old debate changed literally overnight. I know that's not the case, but after seeing all of this play out, it sure feels that way. But today, I'm not just gonna show you some cherry-picked clips or unhinge this narrative even further. I'm gonna show you real film, real data, and proof of how we might actually be done with the 80s and 90s. And of course, if Michael Jordan really had no left hand. Spoiler, he did.
It's crazy that you have to say, oh, by the way, one of the greatest basketball talents ever. Yeah, he actually could use his left hand.
Players are better than players of the past movement for quite some time now. In fact, as crazy as it is for younger fans to say Michael Jordan was trash, it's just as absurd for older fans to say the game hasn't evolved and gotten better over the last 30 years. Because that's all this debate really is. Young fans versus old fans, or fans that watched this versus fans that are watching this. But objectively, players today are much better than they were in the 80s and even the 90s.
Yes. And that's what makes the whole GOAT debate with, LeBron, Jordan, and especially evaluating reigns, playoff success, and competition. That's what makes that topic to me so frustrating. Because, Clyde Drexler is a bum. Clyde Drexler is, today's, Jaylen Brown or DeMar DeRozan, right? Which, it's all right. Why, though, right? Clyde Drexler's all-time great, LeBron had to go up against, Steph Curry for a couple reigns. When did Jordan have to go up against a talent like that? It's different eras, different play styles, a different time, right? Evaluate the player's success, their strengths and their weaknesses in the time that they played, right? I mean, because if that really was the case where, Reigns did everything that mattered, then Bill Russell should be the GOAT because he has 11 reigns. But guess what? He played in an era where there was 8 or 10 teams total, so it wasn't seen as that much of an accomplishment to win those 11 reigns or go to playoffs every year because there wasn't that many teams in the league, right? But 11 reigns is 11 reigns. Robert Horry is 7, but he was a role player for all those.
Specifically, the lower end of the talent pool in the NBA today is vastly better than it was in the past. I think great players would be great in any era, but with the spacing, the shot making, the emphasis on offense.
Great players, all-time greats are all-time greats for a reason. And that is something that grinds my gears and is so frustrating to me. It's Steph Curry, if you put him in the 80s, he would be a role player because the game is too, physical, macho defense and everything. Steph Curry would not be able to average 5 points. It's no, Steph Curry is an all-time great. He would be able to figure it out because all-time great players adapt and are able to succeed in any era. So, Steph Curry would cook the 80s and 90s. Giannis is not getting turned into a fucking plumber in the 90s. No, Giannis is dominating in any era. If you put LeBron in Jordan's era, he dominates. Any all-time great dominates in any era. Just like if you put Jordan in today's league, he would dominate.
As opposed to defense, has made the depth across the NBA today just way ahead of where it was in the 80s and the 90s. There was, without exaggeration, guys in the NBA throughout the 80s and 90s that were on NBA rosters just to accumulate fouls and sit in the paint and be big. Some of these players were offensively inept, and that was okay because their role was not to create offense. But in today's NBA, where offense reigns supreme, there is no room for these players. Now, you could and should go back and watch film of games, not highlights, from this era and see just how limited the skill sets of some of these players were. The shot making, for the most part, was limited to set jumpers, slashers coming downhill for layups, and big men trying to muscle their way to a bucket down low in the midst of what appears to be a wrestling match. Catch a player off guard with the double team, and they immediately pick up their dribble. Simple things like guards turning their back to the basket 20 feet out instead of creating space off the dribble. Even players looking down at the ball while trying to get out on a fast break was very common in this era. And these aren't lowlights or cherry-picked incidences. This is just what the game looked like 35 years ago. But even without film, nearly every metric suggests modern players are more capable of players in the past. Free throw percentage was worse, three-point percentage was worse, turnover percentage was higher. They used to shoot more free throws, but still ended up with far less points. Now, this is not to say that this era of hoops was trash. That's just disingenuous and flat out wrong. These were the best players in the world at the time. It was just simply not as good as what it is today. But maybe there's another layer to this that needs to be factored in to really understand why these players were not as skilled as the players of today.
Let's hear it.
Now, despite this being a very relevant topic for years, the idea of rule changes and how these changes have affected the game still remain a mystery to some. Players were a product of their era and the rules of their era. The first step to discovering greats of the past is to watch film of them play. The next step is to gather and understand the context of the film you are watching. When you see a 6'9" Magic Johnson go flying down the court with what looks like kind of a stiff dribble, you may think the man has no bag. But my friends, Magic Johnson did have a bag, but the rules in place at the time only...
I know we're not talking about bag talk, Jimmy. Come on! You know my opinions on the whole bag talk, where it's like, oh, LeBron has no bag, even though he is the all-time leading scorer in the NBA. Guys like Jordan Clarkson, Jordan Poole have deeper bags than LeBron, but guess what? Jordan Poole is historically and statistically maybe the worst player in the NBA right now. But he has a deeper bag than LeBron, though.
Allowed him to reach so far into it before he got called for every violation in the rulebook.
Tim Duncan didn't have a bag because he was the big fundamental for a reason. He did not need a bag. All he needed to do was get the ball down low, post you up, post fade, post hook, post shimmy, bank off the glass, and you couldn't do anything to stop it. It didn't look pretty. It was never going to be on SportsCenter, but Tim Duncan is an all-time GOAT.
Consider the fact that any move where your hand wasn't completely on top of the basketball was considered a carry. No zero steps, no gather steps. You get 2 steps, and anything more was called a travel. No backward shuffles to create separation. No lunging into players to draw easy fouls. Here's a clip of Danny Ainge hitting Kevin McHale with a hezzy in the mid-'80s. And the man thinks he just witnessed witchcraft.
But when practice sessions were completed, some of the most competitive competition began.
Double dribble. Double dribble. He did too.
Here's some more clips of players getting called for travels and carries, doing moves that are very typical and allowed in 2024. 90% of the moves you see today, the very method most players generate their offense, would be called for some sort of violation 40 or 30 or even 20 years ago. And this isn't just some cop-out or excuse as to why these players of the past weren't doing this stuff. The rule changes are real, documented pieces of NBA history. You can literally look them up. The game...
NBA players, maybe this is a hot take, maybe you guys don't agree with this, but NBA players, no matter how offensively gifted they are and how much the skill is better in today's league, every offensive dominant player in the NBA right now travels every single time you see a highlight or you see their bag talk, right? Steph Curry, every time he's going down the court, he's doing a travel or he's doing something. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is doing some travel. Donovan Mitchell is doing some travel, right? Kyrie is doing some, star step travel. Like every offensive player you can think of in today's league is doing some illegal move. But NBA players, A, have admitted themselves that they travel, they break the rules, and they don't care. And honestly, the referees, Adam Silver, they also don't really care because guess what? Huge offensive moments, huge like, ha ha ha, ha ha ha, hezzies, right? Is must-watch TV, and it gets, clips on, TikTok and YouTube and everything. So they just allow it because they know that it gets more people to watch their content.
Got looser, players grew up and shaped their game around these looser rules, and now they have free reign to let their basketball bag run wild. But that's kind of the point. Players of the past didn't grow up practicing 25-footers. They didn't work on a dozen moves to create separation. They played in offensive systems that focused on the team, the collective, schemes and sets that resembled something closer to college basketball, where ISO possessions were few and far in between, so they never developed an arsenal to counter these situations. The rules of the time limited their game, which resulted in them having a more limited skill set than players today. If Larry Bird grew up with a three-point line, he might have been the greatest long-range shooter ever, but he didn't. And as a result, he didn't shoot a lot of threes, and he wasn't as efficient as the best shooters today.
Let me take a look at a couple of those names. Emmanuel Quickly, he's a fine player. Marco Bellinelli, bum. Richard Jefferson, bum. Al Horford, bum. Nick Young, go back to Chian with Ike Azalea. Larry Bird, he's a bum. OG Anunoby, fine. Kirk Heinrich, he's a bum. Lauri Markkanen, bit of a redemption arc. Mike Muscala, he's a bum. Jason Tatum will never win a ring. Wesley Matthews is a role player at best. And then I can't even pronounce the last one.
We can sit here and assume these players of the past might be as capable as players today if they were playing under the same rules and conditions, but they didn't. And I don't think we should assume that. The fact is they played in a different time and they became a product of that time. But that's not to say
Agreed. If Michael Jordan played in today's league with the three-point line, with all the rules that we just established, how they, openly admit they travel and they don't really care because it brings in more butts and seats. If Jordan had the same rules in place and the three-point line was what it is now, Jordan would have been a better three-point shooter than what he once was in the 80s and 90s. But the reality is the three-point shot was not as important as it was today as it was back then, so it wasn't really a necessity for Jordan to have a three ball. But in today's league where it's a necessity, yeah, he would have been a better three-point shooter.
the game was trash back then, or that the superstars of these eras couldn't compete in today's league. Now, as time goes by, I think it's easy to forget just how long ago 1980 was. 44 years ago, if my math is correct, which is in fact a very long time ago. In 1985, Magic Johnson won an NBA title, Larry Bird won the league MVP, and Michael Jordan won Rookie of the Year. That was 39 years ago from today, which is the same exact amount of time that has passed from that 1985 season to the year the NBA was founded in 1946.
Man, imagine being a fan in 1985, right? You just watch Magic win a ring, Larry Bird win MVP, and Jordan is a rookie coming to the league and already being dominant. Imagine being a fan back then. I wonder what it was like in that moment. Obviously, I wasn't born for another 14 years. It's just crazy to think about. Right. Like, is that the equivalent of, let's say, LeBron winning a ring? You have probably Jokic or Giannis win MVP, and then you have Victor Wembanyama win Rookie of the Year. I'll say that's probably the equivalent.
Look at these clips. Do you think these players could compete with the likes of Bird, Magic, and Jordan? Let me answer that for you. No. But take the best players of the 80s and 90s, and could they compete in today's league? Absolutely. Give these guys some credit. Watching this today is the equivalent of watching this in the 80s. And yet this product is vastly closer to the basketball we see today than this product was to what fans were witnessing in the 80s.
And that is why Bob Cousy's a bum. That is why Bob Cousy is overrated, playing in that black and white scene. Bob Cousy, the Houdini the hardwood, is... This is going to sound like a hot take, but Bob Cousy is overrated as hell. Bob Cousy's overrated. Because the fact that Bob Cousy got to play with a guy like Bill Russell, and Bob Cousy did not get much success from that, from playing with a guy like that, is, to me, is something that is a huge con that for some reason nobody really talks about. And secondly, Bob Cousy, even in his own time era, he was overrated, right? Bob Cousy played in an era where he just played with plumbers, firefighters. He just played with white people, right? That's not being made racist. That's just stating a fact. It was at a time where people, as firefighters, plumbers, whatever, had day jobs, and then, went to, their local basketball court and played a game in the NBA in the afternoon and evening. And that's what people did. That was the era that Bob Cousy played in. That's number one. And number two, he played in an era where black players were not allowed to be in the league yet. And guess what? He was a good player when it was only white people. But as soon as black people like Oscar Robertson were able to enter the league, Bob Cousy was history. He was an afterthought. He did not have any success after that. Coincidence? I think not.
In fact, we can use different superstars as sort of a cross-generational measuring stick to see just how stiff the competition has been over the years. Larry and Magic played Michael, who played Kobe, who played LeBron, who has played the players of today. And nowhere down this timeline was there any real jump or fall off in production or level of competition from one era to the next. Each era...
Timeline of NBA eras. Let's be honest, chat. If we're keeping it 100% right now, another hot take I'm about to drop on y'all. Be prepared for this bombshell. LeBron did not have an era. As much as people acclaim him to be the GOAT and all-time great talent, he never had an era. You had the Bill Russell era, you had the Kareem era, you had the Magic and Bird era, you had the Jordan era, you had the Kobe era, and then you have the Jokic, Giannis era, right? Maybe Victor Wembanyama is next up. But LeBron never had an era. Because think about it. He was drafted in 2003. You still had, Kobe kicking around in his prime, so that was the Kobe era. And then when he finally won championships in the 2010s, I mean, you could say that the 2010s is LeBron's era, but there's a little known figure that also came in the 2010s and dominated from Davidson, and his name is Steph Curry. You can make the argument that 2010s, especially late 2010s, was Steph Curry's era. So, for being honest, LeBron never had an era, which is crazy. Is he really y'all's GOAT? At least my GOAT has an era.
Had their stars. Those stars crossed paths with stars of other eras, and no one era was clear-cut ahead of the other. If the 80s were so bad, then why did players of the 90s have to wait for those guys to get old and retire to have a shot at winning? And if the 90s were so bad, then why did players of the 2000s not win until those guys retired? We don't need to assume that adjacent eras could compete with one another because we actually saw it. MJ struggled with some of the guys that came before him, Shaq struggled against Hakeem, and Kobe struggled against MJ, LeBron struggled against guys like Duncan and Dirk, and players of today have struggled to get past some of the older players in the league who are a product of the previous era. Now, what...
I would not think that Jokic has struggled. Luka has not struggled. Giannis has not struggled. I would say those guys have not really struggled to compete with a guy like Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Kawhi, even Curry, as you say in this, graphic. I would make the argument Jokic has not struggled in that. Shaq was dominant when he was in the Magic, so I wouldn't really call that struggling. Jordan, I mean, can you say he struggled in the 80s? Because, I mean, yeah, he didn't win yet because of the whole, Magic Bird era, but he still was putting up 30 points a game. He just didn't have a competent teammates around him until Phil Jackson showed up.
What we shouldn't do is jump 3 or 4 eras at a time, ignoring entire decades of evolution and saying the game back then was better or even as good as it is today. At a certain point, the knowledge and wisdom that comes from actually witnessing decades of NBA history, like some older fans have, becomes skewed and watered down by nostalgia and a generational bias. Superstars are superstars because their game transcends the era they played in, but they also played in an inferior league. These two ideas are not mutually exclusive, and although generational talents of the past would do just fine today, this same logic does not apply to the vast majority of the league throughout the 80s and 90s. So, if the 80s were inferior to today's league, and the 90s were inferior as well, when did the NBA become not trash? Well, it depends.
You better not say, Jimmy Howard, you better not say it was no longer trash in 03 when LeBron, Ramon, James entered the league, and that's when the NBA no longer became trash.
On how you look at it. Ironically, I think there's a pretty clear distinction to the skill set of players before Michael Jordan hit his peak and after. For example, the early 90s and late 90s, although being in the same decade, were massively different in play style and skill set. Think for a second about the fact that Magic Johnson was still in his prime in the early 90s, and Allen Iverson was entering his prime in the late 90s. In less than 10 years, basketball became a massively different game. By the late 90s, the players who grew up watching Jordan fly through the air and slice up defenses were in the league and were reshaping the role that perimeter players played. Guys like Kobe Bryant, Allen Iverson, Ray Allen, Stephon Marbury, Grant Hill, Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter. All these guys came into the league around the same time and were products of what they saw MJ do throughout his career. Players with a skill set that more closely resembles what we see today than it did to the skill sets of players of the 80s and even early 90s. This is where I think most fans might make the distinction of when the league really took a leap, not in competitiveness, but rather play style. You can go back and watch these guys play, and it's not too different than watching an NBA game today. Or you can point to the shift in play style that happened in the late 2010s, after Steph Curry redefined what makes a great championship caliber player, and the league adjusted to this new three-point heavy, perimeter-focused style of basketball. Similar to Jordan, the kids who watched what Steph was doing in the mid-2010s emulated that style of play, tailored their games to it, and are now in the league doing things that only Steph could.
Oh, Bradley Beal. You think he missed that shot? Not to go too hard on Bradley Beal, not to have Bradley Beal catch any strays, but Jesus. That Suns team with KD, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal is a disaster. And a big reason part of that is because of Bradley Beal, because not only wholly overpay, but there are 3 players that play the exact same way. KD and Booker, Bradley Beal, all are ISO, ball-dominant players that can't play a lick of defense. Yes, that is a good team. That is a good setup for a team. That is a championship team right there. 3 ISO guys who are selfish and can't play defense. No playmakers, no defense in sight. All they do is score. And some of them can't even do that well.
Do a decade ago. So if we're done with the 80s and 90s, where can we look back and no longer apply this era tax on these players? I think most fans would agree that the turn of the century is where the modern era of hyper-skilled players began. You can say objectively that this era was not trash, and most players of this generation would do just fine in today's league. But if that is the case, then modern NBA fans are holding a ticking time bomb, and they might not even know it.
Show Wemby highlights.
and a new generation of NBA fans claim our favorite players, the guys we grew up watching, are not as good as the players of the future, what will you have to say? Right now, there is no one in the world who can shoot like Steph Curry. But inevitably, there will be. And eventually, there will be many players who can shoot like him. His records will fall, his percentages won't look as good through the lens of 2040, and although his legacy will be cemented, his actual game will be put into question. And based on the arguments I'm hearing today on why past players were trash, we will have nothing to say that will change their minds. We know that Curry was the first to do what he's doing. He is a pioneer of the modern NBA. We have context to back up our claims. But if we aren't willing to hear older fans out today, what makes us think younger fans will hear us out in the future? Mark my words. There will be a day when young fans will go back, watch film of LeBron, in the future. In fact, it's already happening. Fans saying he has no bag. Younger players putting up bigger numbers than he ever did. Skill sets a bit deeper.
Chat? Is that even a lie? Or is that truthful? That, LeBron has no bag and LeBron can't compete. No, actually, it's actually crazy what the NBA is going to turn into. And that's like 10, 20, 30 years even. Because think about it. You have guys like Chet. And you have guys like Victor Wembanyama. 7'3", 7'4", 10-foot wingspan that can shoot, that can play elite all-time great level defense, that can play make, that can do everything. Right? You have Giannis, you have Jokic. Like, the era that we are entering into with Victor Wembanyama at the helm is going to be crazy. And no, 100% agree. Right? Like, let's just say we get to a league where, there's positionless basketball, and from 1 through 5, every single player on the team is a 7-foot demigod. 100%. Those fans that grow up watching that kind of basketball are going to be watching old 2003, 2004, 2005, old LeBron clips and being like, yeah, this 6-foot LeBron player, he can't compete because he's just too short. All these guys in the NBA in 2040 are all 7 foot tall and bigger. But no, 100% agree. And yeah, should be interesting. So it's like, oh, you may think LeBron's safe right now, but, give it 20, 30 years, we're going to be watching, old LeBron clips, or we're going to be saying that, oh, LeBron's an all-time great, but what's his record in the finals? Like 4-11, 4-12 or something? Not my GOAT. My GOAT wouldn't go 4 for 12 for the finals. Removing context, removing competition, all that stuff. Reigns matter. Steph Curry would be seen as this generation's John Starks, probably. Or JJ Redick.
With games that look more polished. It's all fun and games now to crack jokes about past eras. But our day will come too. And it ain't gonna be pretty. But Giannis could only run and dunk. Your era was trash. Y'all had a dude who couldn't get 2 feet off the ground running the whole league. You can scramble to pull up clips and show the numbers, but their minds will already be made up. This is why I think it is so important to have genuine, thought-out discourse about the game if you're truly a fan of it. But to all of the older fans out there, you kinda started this whole thing. For years, we heard y'all badmouth modern players, saying the league is soft, players today couldn't compete back then. Back in my day, real men played the game. Y'all cannot be mad that some fans are done with the 80s and 90s when y'all never even gave modern basketball a chance. Sure, a lot of fans never took the time to go back and watch the greats of the past, but let's be honest for a second. Older fans don't watch games today. They catch a stray clip on Facebook of LeBron flopping, and like an echo chamber of disgruntled old men, they just start firing away in the comments, agreeing with one another. Y'all asked for this. I've been watching the NBA since the mid-2000s. Kobe, D-Wade, McGrady, Iverson, Shaq, Nash, those were my guys. But I can acknowledge those greats and say they were incredible, while also acknowledging that that version of the NBA as a whole was not as refined or as good as it is today. Now, will I be able to make that distinction in 20 years when some snot-nosed brat tells me my glorious king was trash? I'm not so sure. Now, it's time to once and for all take a real close look at this accusation that Michael Jordan did not have a left hand. I felt like I was having a bad dream when I first saw this claim, but unfortunately, I was not. I feel like no one actually believes this. This is just some high-level trolling. But in an effort to stop this nonsense from spreading any further, I have no choice but to take these accusations seriously. So I selected 8 random games ranging from Michael Jordan's rookie season all the way up to the mid-90s, and play by play gathered all of his possessions throughout these games.
The fact that people question an all-time great, oh, he only had one hand to go off of, is crazy.
Jordan made a move with his left hand or his right hand 227 times. Of those 227 moves, 121 of them were with his right hand and 106 of them were with his left hand. Of the 120,
and also, who has the time to look at game footage and being like, oh, he went with the right hand, check. Oh, 2 minutes later, oh, he went with the left hand this time. Like, who has the time for that?
moves that he made with his left hand.
Respect to you, Jimmy, for doing that work, because I would lose my mind doing something like this.
In a shot in which he made 51%.
I will lose my sanity.
Resulted in a turnover. So, based on this data, Jordan was definitely more comfortable going right, especially near the rim and even on mid-range jumpers. He struggled a bit in comparison to his right whenever he pulled up off of a left-handed dribble. But overall, Jordan went to his left 47% of the time. And although it was his weaker hand, he was still above league average even while going to his left. But 8 games in 350 minutes of basketball is a relatively small sample size. So I looked into it further and found this: a detailed breakdown of Michael Jordan's shot chart and shot tendencies in 3 seasons from 1990 to 1992. 126 games and over 4,800 minutes in total, tracking exactly what Michael did on.
Once again, who has time for
And here's
this?
what the data shows.
That is insane. People have too much time on their hands.
In isolation, going either to his right or to his left hand. 48% of those moves were with his right hand.
No, this is actually full-on glazing, right? Like, this is actual full-on glazing. Imagine studying a man so closely that you watch what hand they go off of. That is full-on glazing.
And 52% of those moves were with his left hand. When going to the right, Michael shot 61.7% on 410 shots with 15 turnovers, resulting in 1.38 points per possession. When going to his left, Michael shot 61.3% on 421 shots with 36 turnovers, resulting in 1.31 points per possession. So even with a much larger sample size, Michael not only had a left hand, he went to it just as often as he went to his right and was nearly as proficient with his left as he was with his right. Now, for some context, throughout this 3-year span, Michael made on average 4.4 left-handed isolation moves, or in this case, isolation possessions, that resulted in 1.31 points per possession. Now, here are some prolific scorers from this season and their overall tendencies and efficiency in isolation. Keep in mind, this data includes both right-handed and left-handed.
Oh, all right. I just wanted to, pause to see a couple of these players. All right. So we got Kawhi up top. We got DeJounte Murray, DeMar DeRozan, GOAT, James Harden, Shea, Luka, Embiid, Flopper, overrated, Jay Taco, okay. Paul George. Is that Jaren Jackson? Looks like it. I'm assuming that's Jaren Jackson. De'Aaron Fox, Giannis, Kyrie. Is that Zion? Devin Booker, Trae Young, Cam Thomas. Okay, I see you, Cam. Dame, Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson, Ant, KD, Paolo, Anthony Summits, and just at the bottom, LeBron. I guess Embiid, LaFlopper.
Moves from these players. And now here is Michael Jordan with just his left hand. So, yeah. I'd say contrary to what has now become popular belief, Michael Jordan had a left hand. And I cannot believe we had to dig into the data to come to this conclusion. I think the overall idea that the 80s and 90s were a far less skilled time in the NBA compared to today is probably fair. I mean, you'd be crazy to think the game hasn't evolved in 4 decades. But to say the league was trash back then is just wrong. I think more than anything, it's the style of play and the way basketball games would unfold back then that really throws some fans off when they go to watch film of these old games. It's like looking at a box score from the mid-2000s and thinking everyone sucked because the games finished with final scores in the 80s. But the players weren't bad, it was just a different game back then. It was slower, more methodical, more team and scheme-based than it is today. And similarly, I think you could say the 80s and 90s had its fair share of bad basketball. But that doesn't mean all the players were bad, especially the superstars of those eras. That was just the state of the game they were playing in. I think some older fans have a skewed perception of how good the game was back then, but I also think they just genuinely liked that style of ball regardless of the evolution of the league. In 20 years, there could be a dozen players around the league that shoot like Steph Curry, but I doubt we will hold the same appreciation and affinity for those players as we did to the guy who pioneered this style of play and did it during the good old days. In the 90s, no one looked back at how the league was in the 60s claiming it was better. And so realistically, we shouldn't be looking back at the 80s and 90s claiming the league was superior than it is today, or even just as good for that matter. A lot of these ideas that favor modern basketball are becoming more mainstream as fans dive deeper into these topics and add context to narratives that have been floating around for decades. But I think this push to be done with the 80s and 90s is a bit overkill. We want to add context and nuance and knowledge to these discussions, not remove entire decades from it altogether. Sadly, I don't think any of this has or will change anyone's mind. This revolt against old school ball was either confirmation of what you already thought, or this entire discussion is just blasphemy to you. Are we done with the 80s and 90s? Maybe, but for the sake of the game and the greats that paved the way, I sure hope not.
Is that it? Okay, yeah, that's it. All right. Let me go to the just chatting section. All right. So that was our first ever reaction video on stream, so hope y'all enjoyed. Final closing thoughts on it. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I mean, pretty much I said all my thoughts, in the moment while on stream, that any all-time great in any era would be able to dominate. Like, I think it's stupid when people make the claim that, someone like... I also don't need the headphones, so why am I wearing them anymore? But I also think it's stupid that, when we have people say like, oh, Steph Curry, would not survive in the 80s and 90s because, the bad boy Pistons would, shove him all around and he wouldn't be able to do anything. It's like, no, he'll be able to get success out of it because, all-time great for a reason. Same thing with Giannis. Same thing with Kyrie. Same thing with anybody. Same thing with LeBron. Right, so the LaFlop memes that, LaFlop would not be able to survive in the bad boy Pistons. Like, no, he would, because he's an all-time great for a reason, right? So that's the first thing I want to talk about. Second thing about the whole, we have a ticking time bomb where, in 2040, 2050, we look back on the NBA, the 2000s, 2010s, with the same context of, we don't want the 2000s, we don't want the 2010s. 100% agree, right? Because, the game of basketball will always be evolving, will always be changing, and there will be a time where, I'm sure in 2040, 2050, where, like I said earlier, how it's going to be 5 positionless basketball players, how they're all 7 foot tall and above, how they can all shoot like Curry, they can all defend like, prime Hakeem Olajuwon. They can all, dunk like a prime Vince Carter, right? That's just the game of basketball now, that time frame. And then watching, 2010s basketball, it's like, yeah, it was a different era, different time. And, the players nowadays would dog walk any of those players in the 2000s because, well, it's a different era. You have to judge, and the same thing with the GOAT debate and, judging all-time great talents, great time, judging where an all-time great is on an all-time great list, you have to look at their pros, their cons, their successes, their failures, right? Their accomplishments. You have to look at everything in the lens of their current era and time frame, and not just, oh, but if we put them in this era, how much better, how much worse will they do? You have to look at players who played in their own era, in their own time frame, and look at that frame, right? Like, for instance, Kobe Bryant is an unbelievable all-time great talent. No one should disagree with that, and if you do, you are crazy if you disagree with that. But in his era, Kobe only won 1 MVP and only won 3 Finals MVPs because he also played with Shaq for a couple of those reigns. Does that diminish Kobe's legacy, his success because of that? Does LeBron's legacy get diminished because the first time he won a ring was teaming up with 2 other Hall of Fame talents? Right? You have to look at things in their own era and their own context. So, we'll see what happens. Let's see, any other final closing thoughts on it? I would say one other final closing thought on this is, connecting back to what I was saying earlier about, connecting and viewing eras and players based on the era they play in. That's why I think, in my opinion, Tim Duncan is one of the weirdest players to evaluate. I personally have him as, in my top 5 list of all-time great talents. It warrants it. He has the championships. He has the MVPs. He has the Defensive Player of the Year. He has the All-NBAs. He has the All-Defensive Teams, right? And he may not be stuffing the stat sheet from, like a points perspective, because I'm going to say the highest points a game he averaged was like 17 or 20 or whatever, which is a far outcry from like the 30 points we're just so used to seeing, nowadays, right? But Tim Duncan was very valuable, was a crazy all-time great talent, and he may not have, stuffed the stat sheet in points-wise, but he was the big fundamental for a reason, and he may not offer 30 points the offensive end, but he, to me, was one of the best defenders I've ever seen. So that's why he goes in my top 5 list. And when it comes to evaluating eras and evaluating talents, Tim Duncan has gotten one of the weirdest treatments I've seen in the NBA discourse community, right? Because I remember when he retired in 2014, 2015, right? People saw him as a Hall of Fame player. He was an all-time great. Like, no one disagreed on that. He was an all-time great talent, 100%. But people had him in like the, 30s, 40s, maybe at worst like 50s, as far as like evaluating, players of where they rank on the all-time lists. And then as of recently, he's jumped into people's top 10, or in my case, the top 5, because his accomplishments, especially the advanced stats, point to him being underappreciated. And unfortunately, because he was not on, Sports Center with, posters or anything, he did not get the recognition and respect that he deserved. So, I'm hoping we don't have the same thing when it comes to era talk that we did have with, Tim Duncan, where, we can look at the stats and, all we want, but the narratives change based on what time period we are in with the sport of basketball, right? So I'm hoping we don't have the conversation where it's like, oh, we don't the 2000s and 2010s, how, LeBron, same thing with, Jordan, how, LeBron couldn't win a ring without, Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh and Eric Spoelstra. Same thing with Jordan, how, he couldn't win a ring without, Phil Jackson, Scottie Pippen. I'm hoping we don't have those conversations, right? Because same thing with Jordan, how, he may have, not had the, greatest player of success, but he still was averaging 30, 40. He just didn't have the teammates around him to win a ring. Same thing with LeBron. It's crazy that, LeBron fans will, shit on, Jordan, early playoff failures, getting swept in the first round or whatever, all they want, but their glorious king, literally had the same first round early playoff history where he was getting beat by superior teams. It wasn't his fault. He was still putting up buckets. He just didn't have teammates around him until he did. And then it became an asterisk. But hope y'all's enjoyed.